Welcome to the Line Movement MMA betting show. I'm Daniel Levy from Best Fight Picks and Half the Battle, joined now by Dan Tom of MMA Junkie and the Protect Your Neck podcast. Today, we're going to be talking UFC on ABC One. It's a historic event. Max Holloway is taking on Calvin Kattar in the UFC's debut on ABC. We finally don't have to tell our family members to sign up to ESPN Plus. Just turn it on Channel 5, Channel 11, whatever it is for you. And the fight's going to be right there for the taking. And they couldn't have picked a better main event, Dan Tom. They got Calvin, the Boston finisher, Kattar, taking on Max Blessed Holloway, the former champion, the future Hall of Famer. I mean, this is already, to start off the year, this is one of the best featherweight fights that we've seen in a long time. And it hasn't even happened yet, and I know it's going to be, Dan Tom.
It is the matchup, the fact that fights are back, the fact the fights are on ABC. That's a classic, right? That goes even before our time, Dan. In fact, I feel like since I'm so glad, and I know you are too, to be here at the Line Movement channel, which like the video, subscribe below if you haven't already. I feel like we should have our own old school Line Movement ABC versions of the sports coats, with the remember those classic, if you watch the old boxing fights, they have the old announcers. I love those. I don't know if the UFC will get too crazy with that. Maybe they'll make Rogan wear a sports coat. I don't even think he'll be there. Either way, as you can tell, Dan, I'm excited.
The only coats that are getting handed out these days are the tested clean 50 times for USADA jackets. I know Dan Tom knows referring to. And they got the Hall of Fame jackets too, so maybe we can throw out the word and let them know, hey, you got to get the ABC code going too. But Dan Tom, this main event right here, I mean, listen, Max Holloway, a lot of people thought he beat Alexander Volkanovski in the rematch. According to Max, 80 to 90% of the world knows he won. That's what he says. So, he's definitely the favorite here. I mean, currently minus 150, minus 160, depending where you look. I know blitzbet.eu, they've got some good odds as well. But Dan, I mean, this is going to be a fight between two strikers. And in my opinion, someone's going to have to get seriously hurt to shoot a takedown here.
Yeah, neither man are obviously known for their grappling. And as you kind of known with my breakdowns, at least my more in-depth written ones, which you can find over at MMA Junkie, of course, I'll have to write a grappling section. I don't have to. I choose to, obviously. It's a part of the game. But when you're writing, or analyzing or prognosticating, if you will, for a grappling match between two strikers, it becomes weird. However, I will say, I think that the middle ground, and maybe you can let me know what you think, Dan. Perhaps you're not of this camp, but I think the middle ground here is that everyone thinks this fight's going to be competitive. And if it is that competitive as people think or as people portray on paper, that means rounds will be tight. And if rounds are tight, I will be curious if it does come down to adjustments, like a lot of Max Holloway fights have recently, right? Win or lose, they have. If it does come down to those adjustments, Dan, does Calvin Kattar, for example, dust off the high school wrestling chops? He apparently wasn't too bad at it. We've seen him do it before against other fights, against other Pacific Islander folk like Andre Feely in his UFC debut, which I believe you were on, Mr. Kattar, for Dan. So I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility. However, if anybody does it, I think it's opportunistic, and I think it's the Kattar camp.
Glad you brought that up. Took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, when you talk about a guy like Calvin Kattar, a lot of people actually don't know he's got a high school wrestling background. So if these rounds are kind of tight, I'm curious to see if he tries to seal off a round with a takedown. It's very hard to take down Max, by the way. And on the Max side of things, I don't expect him to shoot any takedowns. But that being said, if Calvin shoots on Max, Max has a damn good guillotine. I know you remember, speaking of Andre Feely, when Max Holloway choked out Andre Feely. I know you remember when he choked out Cub Swanson. So I wouldn't sleep on those long arms of Max Holloway with an opportunistic submission either.
Yeah, that's a great point. And even though, like you said, Max is the least likely to go for a takedown, not only do failed offensive takedowns lead to that front headlock position, but, when you've seen guys like Zabit take Kattar down, Kattar's got good defense too, mind you. But when he has been taken down the couple of times or so he has in the octagon, he'll use more kind of wrestling style get-ups where he'll kind of tripod up to his feet. Now, I don't think he has to worry about back take so much, despite being at featherweight and against a capable featherweight. But that tripod also, that turtle tripod position also leaves your neck out for, again, that front headlock position that you highlighted, Dan. So in the scrambles, I think Max is going to be very dangerous there. So does Calvin even want to take it there? I don't know, but you're right. The wrestling edge, at least on paper, needs to at least be talked about and acknowledged for Calvin.
No doubt about it. And speaking of edges, I mean, we mentioned Calvin might have a wrestling edge, volume edge. I mean, I think it's a no-brainer here. That has to go to Max Blast Holloway. He's going to be throwing a lot more volume than Calvin. It's just a matter of, can Calvin possibly land the harder shots and sway the judges that way? And I don't want to bring up the possibility of a knockout, even though there is a possibility when you got two big hitters like this. It's just, neither guy's been knocked out yet, right? So it's kind of hard to predict things that we haven't seen. But at the same time, you got two bangers in there like these two guys, and calling them bangers, honestly, that might kind of discredit them, because that might kind of insinuate that they're not the brightest or this or that, when these two, the fight IQ on Max Holloway is off the charts. Obviously, Calvin Kattar's in the position he's in for a reason. These guys are very intelligent. So that being said, where do you kind of, in your head, when you kind of think about this matchup, where do you kind of stack up the volume of Max Holloway up against the power of Calvin Kattar?
It's interesting. If you look at trends, I feel like it's a lot closer than it perceives. Calvin Kattar has proved himself to be one of the better combination punchers, regardless of division, especially if you look at him fundamentally, mechanically, so on and so forth. And you can criticize Calvin Kattar, really both guys. There's a lot of parallels, by the way, pluses and negatives that they both share. But yes, you can criticize Calvin Kattar for a bit of a slow start. That being said, he is arguably a 5-round fighter. He's taken moments off of his game, which is a big thing for me to page note. However, it's not a cardio, it's not a chin, it's not a mental weakness thing. Kattar doesn't have any of these things. For any criticisms you want to label at him, I don't think it's due to those things. So anybody championing him to be in 5-round fights, I don't blame you. Regardless of whether or not you're picking him here, I think he does project better in 5-round fights. That's of course the case for Max Holloway too, which is why once he got to those 5-round fights, perhaps, that and his technical evolution, we saw Max really blossom. However, even though I don't think they are going to be stopped, I do wonder about Max's volume, because there's been a downtrend in it. Now, you could argue that downtrend happened with, the stat that, what is it, like he lost 3 of his last 5 or 3 of his last 4. But if you look at the common threads of his losses, outside of going back to Dennis Bermudez, which wasn't a loss, especially under today's judging, as bad as it is, right? It's usually been counterpunchers, right? Max Holloway, I always refer to as a builder. And what does a builder need on a job site, Dan? He needs building supplies. So guys like Dustin Poirier or Alexander Volkanovski, who kind of denied him building supplies and made Max work and just countered Max every time he came in, they did really well, regardless of how you scored it. By the way, I scored obviously all those. I might have leaned actually live toward Max, but I was not surprised nor upset when the second one, and then when rewatching it, not to relitigate it, but yes, no issue there. The common thread, counter strikers there. Now that's kind of what I look at for Calvin Kattar for the power. I don't know if he needs to knock Max out, who, like you said, Dan, hasn't been knocked out. However, if he's able to stun him like Dustin Poirier did, you were on Poirier on that one. You remember there. You were live, I believe, on that one, Dan. If he can kind of do that similar effect, then I think we can see Max let off the gas, and I feel like his volume will be less of a factor. But if he can't do that, then yes, that is the common thinking and the correct thinking, I believe. It's the proven, it's the more proven, at least, projection is that, yes, Max Holloway should be able to pull down the stretch if Kattar's power and him being able to find the power is not there.
I'm glad you brought up trends, because one common trend with the people that defeat Max Holloway is that there's a minimum requirement of volume. And to beat a guy like Max Holloway, I mean, according to the numbers, you have to at least land 5 significant strikes per minute or more. Jose Aldo does not land 5 significant strikes or more per minute. Charles Oliveira doesn't. Anthony Pettis doesn't. Lamas, Ortega, Frankie Edgar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. None of these guys do. Dustin Poirier lands way over 5 significant strikes per minute. Alexander Volkanovski lands way over 5 significant strikes per minute. Calvin Kattar, right above 5 significant strikes per minute. So he's meeting that criteria, which is interesting. And that kind of leads me to believe that the strike count might actually be in favor of Holloway, but similar to the Poirier fight. Now, before someone stops me, I gotta let y'all know that I'm not saying that this is going to be like the Poirier fight, because Poirier is a southpaw. Calvin is orthodox. They are different fighters. Poirier is one of the hardest hitters in the 55 division. Calvin's a featherweight, completely different fight. But there's elements to be taken from that Poirier fight. Can you land the harder shots on Max Holloway, make him wobble like Dan Tom said, stun him, and sway the judges that way? Possibly, not saying it's going to happen, but possibly be the first man in UFC history and MMA history to knock down Max Holloway, because right now Max Holloway's got the thing going on that the legendary BJ Penn had going on, and you already know damn well what that is, Dan Tom. Never been knocked down, never been knocked out, right? And that was BJ's whole thing until he finally did get knocked down and knocked out. And with Max Holloway, he's absorbed over 900 significant head strikes. Now, granted, he's Hawaiian, he can take it. It's just at some point that's going to catch up to you. And I'm not saying that's going to be Saturday night in Yas Island, Abu Dhabi. You know, I'm not saying that's when it's going to happen, but I'm also saying I'm not going to be surprised if it does either, Dan Tom.
Absolutely. All great points there. And I really love this good work there. I really love the statistics as far as taking those common statistics that people cite, but you actually applied them in a very contextual, really well done there, Dan. But yeah, on that note, I do believe that at the end of that note there, I should say, that's not any doom and gloom, by the way, folks. And I don't even know where Dan, who he picked. Again, full disclosure, folks, we don't talk about our picks. We actually broke down maybe a little bit of next week's card, full disclosure, but we don't talk about our picks. What you're seeing between me and Dan, it's organic here. We're trying to get to the bottom out to help each other out, to help you out, you know, which is why, again, you need to be sharing, subscribing, liking, and all that good stuff. But I had a similar conversation about Max Holloway, actually. And so I'm glad you mentioned that, because people are like, what are you talking about? He's south of 30. And it's not age in this game. And of course, you know this, Dan. I'm kind of preaching to the audience here, which I'm sure a lot of them are sharp and know it as well. It's a game of mileage in MMA. Jose Aldo's 33. 33 is not old. 33 is a couple years younger than me, my friend. But we all know that Jose Aldo's mileage is a complete different story. And that is something to take in. And you compare it to BJ Penn, and that's something, you know, us Hawaiians, we have a chin, and that's great. And, you know, I'll tip my hand here, Dan. I'm actually going to pick Max Holloway because of his durability. That said, it is a semi-reluctant pick. And even though I'm picking him because of his durability, I fully acknowledge that the bottom's going to drop out. And I would make this argument, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say, Dan. You've been watching the sport for as long as me, I believe. So you've got a similar sample size to draw from. But I believe those guys like the BJ Penns that not only don't get knocked out, have a good chin, but they don't even get knocked down. I believe those guys are actually worse off in the long run, both in and out of the cage, if you know what I mean. And because when that bottom drops, finally for those guys, it drops hard. So that is something to look for in the future. If not, maybe this Saturday. I don't think it happens this Saturday. I'm going to go with Max Holloway by decision because both guys are durable. And I tend to go by that type of evidence, especially when they really just show chin, resilience, mental fortitude. Both guys do that. They've gotten cut, busted noses, and it doesn't dissuade either guy. And I think they're going to both get cut and have busted noses again, each side. But I will slightly side with Holloway if I'm not jumping to conclusions too soon here.
I mean, Calvin's nose is definitely going to bleed. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I mean, he's coming into this fight with a broken nose, just like he came into his last two fights with a broken nose. So it's not like it magically healed. Calvin Kattar's nose will be bloody, like it's bloody every single fight. But that being said, he's such a tough Boston guy that I don't really think he's the kind of guy that's going to be, you know, discouraged, that's going to tone down the volume, that, you know, is going to take a back step because of that. I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. I think you actually really do have to hurt him to make him stop. And I want to talk about that second Volkanovski fight. So the way people make it seem is that Max Holloway was just literally doing anything he wanted at any point against Volk. Like it was just this like walk in the park, and it's this no brainer, and it's the biggest atrocity that he lost of all time. It's this massive robbery. But the way I see it, Dan Tom, is first and second round, clear for Holloway. Fourth and fifth, clear for Volk. Third round is the swing round. So who do you score the third round for? And to kind of break it down on even, you know, more, I guess, intricate terms, the first and second round were like 50-50 until the knockdowns. It's not like Max Holloway was destroying Volk for the duration of those rounds. It was, those rounds could have gone either way until the knockdowns. The knockdowns is what swayed it. I mean, when you have a 50-50 round and one guy gets a knockdown, well, hey, he just won that round. Had there not been a knockdown, I'm not sure, but there was. So you got to give those rounds to Max. No questions asked. But the 2 rounds in the bag, and then he's going over to the commentators, he's shushing them and making all these, hand gestures and all these facial expressions. And to me, kind of seemed like kind of lost his mind a little bit, like his ego kind of blew up. That was an ego situation, Dan Tom. Like, why are you talking to John Anik in the middle of a fight? Like, why are you talking to the people? Like who cares if people were writing you off, or you got Alexander Volkanovski right in front of you? And I feel like he lost concentration. I feel like his ego cost him that fight. And now he's kind of, reciting on the fact that everybody is like, oh, you won that fight. So that's like comfort to him. Whereas I don't know, man. I would kind of, if I was betting on Max, I'd feel better if Max was like, you know what? I had that fight in the bag and then I let it slip through my fingers. Like I didn't put my foot on the gas in those last 3 rounds. I kind of coasted. My ego got the best of me. And Volk was the better man. But that's not what you hear Max Holloway say. You hear Max Holloway talking about how, oh, Dustin, Nate, Jorge, all these guys texted me that I won the fight. The whole world thinks I won the fight. But it's like he's not taking any accountability or responsibility for the fact that, dude, you coasted those last 3 rounds. So don't cry robbery when you took your foot off the gas pedal, is what I think, Dan Tom.
Yeah, man, that was really, unsettling because he is the builder, right? He's the volume guy. All these things that should say those are the rounds where Max comes to life, 3, 4, 5, right? That's where he should be coming to life. So that was so uncharacteristic that, you know what? That speculation that you did, which is speculation, but you know what? It makes sense, Dan, because you look at these trends, and I don't want to bring personal stuff into it, but just a young guy, I think that Ryan Lazares and Ivan Flores are great coaches, and to their credit, they were trying to focus. You were listening in the corner, they're going, Max, focus. Like they were, to their credit, trying to plead with their fighter. But so I don't want to disparage any, I'm a Holloway fan, obviously, but and I don't want to disparage shade to the corner. But even though, I could be a fan of Holloway style in the octagon, you got to look at these things objectively, right? And I don't want to bring personal things into it, but I remember, I don't want to say back in the day, but it feels like it's been a couple years now. As soon as he shifted away from his manager, Brett Butler, that was a big flag.
Brian Butler.
I don't know about Brian Butler. Sorry. I don't know about you, but that was a big flag for me. Right. And then,
hell yeah.
Then you don't want to, speculate and get even more personal, but I watched this guy's footage so many times, and like for the first half of his career, everyone talks about Rush and whatnot. And he always had I think it was Rush's mother and in the corner for most of it. And I think they split up or something, but I don't know. I think, he was with one girl, then he's with this other model and whatnot. And, and again, I'm not hating or anything, but that rock star living, so to speak, as they say, that stereotype, right? It's a stereotype for a reason. And you got to wonder, where a guy's head's at. And what really makes the sample size crazy, Dan, is that, say what you will, and as weird as that fight was, Volk too, and as much as he dropped the ball in the later rounds, he still came out looking way better than we thought he would for having limited training. Say what you will, you don't have to believe him completely as far as limited training, but I do guarantee that his training was somewhat limited, at least in certain ways, maybe not the strength and conditioning or other ways like that. But the fact is, he was able to come in, fight smarter, do things that I haven't seen since the Lamas fight, like the Thai marching variations to draw out leg kicks, fighting a little bit more of southpaw, which I think could be a big thing here. I think if he goes southpaw, that's going to be a big key. If you look, Kattar's never fought any high-level southpaws, and win or lose, everyone who's went southpaw against them, they're usually winning those exchanges and doing really well. I always want to be careful about saying a guy should go southpaw, because I feel like every time I bank on it or say that it makes sense, they don't do it. I'll Wonder Boy Woodley too. I'm like, Wonder Boy's gonna go southpaw on Woodley and F him up, and then he doesn't do it in the first fight. But the times where he does do it in the first fight, he does well. So okay, now he's definitely gonna F him up from a southpaw stance. Nope, he just stares at him from an orthodox stance. So I always want to be careful. I'm like permanently PTSD'd from that. But good Lord, does it make sense for Max Holloway to come out southpaw? I think that'll be a good sign. It's just so hard to predict what kind of Max Holloway we're gonna get.
Yeah, I mean, listen, just like you prefaced everything you said, I'll preface it too. I'm a huge fan of Holloway and Kattar. I mean, I love both these guys. You got a legend in Holloway, who arguably the best featherweight of all time. I know Jose Aldo might have something to say about that. He does have more title defenses, but Max is right up there. And Max beat him twice, by the way. But I mean, you're so right. Like, what I got to say about him parting with Sucker Punch, with Brian Butler, is that it's not just about him getting new management, because it's easy to just be like, hey, you just got new management, no big deal. It's to me, it's the fact that, Brian Butler's Hawaiian, right? For Hawaiians to part with Hawaiians, that's a massive red flag, because I know the kind of loyalty that y'all have. I know like the kind of family vibe that Hawaiians have. And you're Hawaiian, so you can speak on it more than I can, but I'm just saying, like, the kind of vibe that I get from Hawaiians is like real family oriented, a lot of loyalty and like brotherhood. And it's like him parting ways with Brian Butler, even though I haven't found out what happened. Maybe I don't know. It's a massive red flag, like massive red flag. What do you think?
Yeah, man, I don't want to speak out of school. But yeah, I mean, I've been able to hear certain things from horses' mouths, let's just say. So not just normal things, like from the sources sometimes. But I also don't want to speak out of school. So prefacing it though with that, I will say that I don't know how much Hawaiian ties Brian Butler. I don't know why I always say Brett. Thank you for that. That he has, but as a Chinese Hawaiian guy, I can tell you that Brett is definitely also comes from a strong Chinese family as well, and they're very family oriented as well. And more specifically, cultural woo-woo aside, they had more of a family relationship, which is often the cases with a lot of fighters, right? A lot of fighters, you read stories, their connections with their parents aren't necessarily that great. Holloway too, which is documented from Holloway's own mouth, right? And a lot of times, whether it's with coaches or whatnot, right? Follis was this guy for a lot of fighters, and Sean Tompkins was that guy for a lot of fighters. And I know those guys, so I'm not talking bad, but what happened after those two gentlemen passed? What happened with those fighters? They didn't really do well, right? Even the ones that bounced back, which was maybe only half of them, they went through a tough period. And that's not necessarily why Max lost. Max has been fighting the best in the world. We're not writing that off, folks, obviously here, okay? But you have to account for these things, read between the lines, and there was a really strong relationship there. And again, I'm not going to speak out of school or cite this, who said this, or what they said, or this or that. But all those flags and the stereotypical flags you would worry about a younger fighter, it's like it's like that essentially. It's not McGregor levels, you know what I'm saying? It's no one's getting hurt. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like that, but it is stereotypical as far as the things we're alluding to, and as far as where their focus is, right? Because that's what we're objectively talking about here. We're not.
You got caught up in the lifestyle.
Yeah,
you got caught up in the lifestyle.
Everything that comes with it.
I get it. You could tell me more off air, but yeah, listen. And this is not a slight on the great Max Holloway, who, for the 100th time, in my opinion, is a future Hall of Famer, is a legend, is just, I love Max Holloway. How can you not? I mean, I saw him fight Ricardo Lamas in person. I saw him fight Dustin Poirier in person. I met him after the Lamas fight. Super nice guy. Love Max. But I picked these fights objectively. And here, I'm going to go on the opposite side of you, man. I'm going to go with Calvin. Listen, I know he's going to have to rise to the occasion to beat Max Holloway. I know that he's going to have to show us something we haven't seen before. But I think the last fight was a step in the right direction. He landed over 100 significant strikes in a 5-round fight against another Hawaiian, by the way. But I know Max Holloway, huge step up. But like, at least now I know, hey, he can land that 100 strikes in a 5-round fight. He actually landed more strikes against Ige than Max did his last 5-round fight. So at least I know that he can land that much, because Max has landed over 100 strikes in 9 of his last 10. So you gotta, like, that was like a benchmark for me. That was like, okay, he can land 100 significant strikes in a fight. I needed to know that, because statistically speaking, like I told you, there's a minimum requirement, kind of like there's a height requirement on those roller coasters at Six Flags. There's a minimum volume requirement if you're fighting Max Holloway. You have to land at least 5 significant strikes per minute. Calvin Kattar does that. He ticks that box. So I'm going to say that he lands the harder shots in the 5-round duration. He might actually get out volume, but he can sway the judges by having those big moments in the rounds. And I do question not Max's like motivation, because you don't question a legend. Like, to me, him saying he did his last camp over a Zoom call, some people believe it. I don't. I don't think you can do a championship caliber camp over Zoom call, but I get it. Hawaii's on lockdown. You got to look out for the homies. I completely understand. Don't let anybody find out. So I get it. But I am questioning, is he kind of burnt out? Like, how many times can you keep getting back up and show up to the dance in that top form? And I know he's 29 years old, but like Dan Tom said, it's really about mileage. He's 29 years old, but he's absorbed 900 significant head strikes too. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Calvin via decision here by just landing the harder shots over 5 rounds, maybe having the bigger moments. Let's see what happens, right?
Yeah, man, I don't blame you at all or anybody riding that train, by the way. It's a big step up from Dan Ige, but man, go back and watch that fight. Dan Ige fought really freaking smart, and I think he deserves a lot more credit for that fight, by the way, that he gave Calvin. So I'm not surprised. I don't blame you. And the value is definitely on the plus money side on this equation, which sounds obvious, obviously, but that's not always a blanket statement, folks. I do agree with it here, despite technically being on the other side.
Let me say this about Ige, though, man. That fight, not only was that like Ige's Super Bowl and you had the best ever version of Ige we've ever seen, but when you kind of look at the roles, right? Calvin had to play it safe. Calvin was the big favorite in that fight. Like Calvin was fighting someone that was ranked below him. Whereas in this fight, Calvin's got nothing to lose. Calvin doesn't have to play it safe. Calvin can let everything go and kind of be free out there. So I think we're going to see a better Calvin Kattar versus Max Holloway than we did versus Dan Ige. And that's not because Dan Ige is better than Max Holloway. Not at all. It's not even about that. It's just about the moment, the opportunity, about like, when he fought Ige, he had to play it safe. You can't risk your spot in the line. This guy's ranked below you. Whereas here, you're fighting the legend of the division, a guy that a lot of people think is the uncrowned champ. Just go. Everyone already thinks you're going to lose. You're the underdog. So just let it all go.
Absolutely, man. And last thing I'll say is I wouldn't mind being wrong here either, Dan, because I got a lot of respect for Tyson Chartier and the New England cartel. There's a lot of tape out there to dissect on Max Holloway. So regardless of not he's going to win, we're going to find out Saturday. But I can guarantee you Kattar is coming into this one prepared.
And shout out to the 2020 Coach of the Year, Tyson Chartier. Good dude. So I think some big things are ahead for the New England cartel. But yeah, cannot wait for this main event, Dan Tom's going to be fantastic. Now, my friend, we've been waiting 7 long years for this co-main event between Carlos, the natural-born killer Condit, and Matt the Immortal Brown. They were initially supposed to fight in 2013 on Fox. And I remember that face-off they had, Dan Tom. I remember damn well that face-off, how intense it was, and how depressed I was when Matt Brown had to pull out due to injury. Oh, man, because 7 years ago, man, when they're both, in their prime, like, man, that fight would have been so good. And it's still going to be good. Don't get me wrong. It's better late than never, right? But like, if this fight would have happened 7 years ago, it might have actually been this all violence affair. Not saying it's not going to be now, even though I do think there's a chance that, both guys can take a kind of play it safe approach here. And what I mean by that is this. I know you remember before Carlos Condit versus Nick Diaz, how everyone said it was going to be this fucking all-out war. And, Carlos pissed a lot of people off with that game plan. That game plan can work here too. Kind of the hit and run. Even though it's like, looking back at it, it's not even like he really was running away that much. Like he's landing clean head kicks on Nick Diaz and people are getting mad at him. You know what I mean? So it was just a different time. Like back then, people would look down on you if you didn't stand and bang with Nick Diaz. You know what I mean? So, but with Matt Brown, he's got some underrated offensive wrestling, actually. He can land takedowns. He has been working, I forget that guy's name, Kazeka Muniz, I think is his name. He's been working with him for years. And he also worked with a bunch of Cuban Olympian wrestlers as well. He's been working with them for years. So Matt Brown, because I know you remember when he lost to Johnny Hendricks, how much of a letdown that fight was, because he was coming off the Robbie Lawler fight of the year, right? And by the way, Condit also had a fight of the year with Robbie Lawler. Both of them did. But when Matt fought Robbie, and this was after his Eric Silva performance, which was in Ohio, was fight of the night, performance of the night, the whole bit was just an unbelievable, we were like, oh, so Matt's a top 10 guy right now, So after that, he had the war with Robbie Lawler. And then we were thinking, hey, here's Johnny Hendricks, this is going to be an all-out war, and it wasn't. Johnny kind of just took him down like 7 times and just held him down, no problem. So Matt kind of realized he had to, work on some things after that, and he's been since that point. That was a long ass time ago. That was pre-Reebok, but he's been working with the Cuban Olympians and all these guys. So I think that if these guys take a play it safe approach, Condit can kind of, hit and run on the outside, kind of point, don't get into a brawl. Matt can kind of exploit the fact that, Condit doesn't have the best takedown defense, never has. I mean, historically speaking, even in his prime, never has. But if they don't play it safe, Dan Tom, and we do get the all-out war we're expecting, hold your horses and buckle your seatbelts, because it's going to be pandemonium. I know what happens when Matt Brown smells blood, and people start getting hurt, and he starts going off on those elbows, those knees, those combinations up close. I know Dan Tom knows what happens when Carlos Condit starts disguising that head kick, or even when he gets taken down, he starts throwing elbows from bottom. Like, he was one of the first guys to introduce the elbows from bottom, like when you get taken down. And that was like a big part of his game back in the day. Now people are kind of learning how to, bicep control, head placement, and kind of how to avoid that. But back in his day, my man, those elbows from bottom were vicious, Dan Tom.
They were, man. You're getting me all excited, all the nostalgic matchups between, these guys have had. And you're right, man. It's been, over half a decade since they were officially rumored, however you want to classify it. We're supposed to get this fight. And this was just one that's kind of easy to, put on any kind of fan, match made, in heaven, top 5, fantasy fights, however you want to break it down. But for me, man, this is, speaking of, could it be too little too late, man? Speaking of being too late, I feel like I should have already got on this photoshopping program that our producer Jordan put me on, because I feel like this matchup, Dan, is just asking for a grumpy old man Photoshop. Just give me that Walter Matthau, Jack Lemmon movie cover, paste Carlos Condit on there and Matt Brown. And I'm not making the low hanging fruit because of their age or that we're getting this matchup too late, which I hope is not the case, by the way. I say that because even like looking at these guys' media this week on their fight week interviews, I don't know if you saw it, but they are both looking, especially Matt Brown is just looking every bit of 40 that he just turned, by the way. And both guys are sounding every grumpy bit of like 70 going on 80, which, by the way, folks, veteran fighters, all of their bodies are at least minimum 70 years old. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So these guys, and listening to how they're talking is like, oh, these guys are pissed off. Now, for Matt Brown, it's not really surprising because Matt Brown, he's kind of got that, Ohio boy. Like, he's just ready to scrap at a drop of a dime. That's also why we love him so much, right? And that's why he's so endearing. Whereas Condit, I was writing him off, and I was even picking Court McGee to beat him because I just thought he was shot, or getting to that level. The confidence and whatnot not being there. And even though the chin is still holding up and keeping him in fights, although, you can be suspicious of that, rightfully so. However, he does have that performance against Court McGee, and I don't want to overinflate it because Court McGee, say what you will, even if you thought he was going to lose, you got to admit it was a weird subpar performance for Court McGee. Court McGee, say what you will about him, always comes to fight, and from the volume, lack of takedowns, he was just kind of underscoring on all his averages from the stats wise, and didn't look good visually, right? So I want to be careful about overinflating Condit's performance off that. However, I think it was just what Condit needed. Say what you will about the victory. However, wherever you sit with it, I think it was just what Condit needed mentally, from a mental perspective. Perhaps that's what was missing. I'm not expecting to see a vintage Condit, though I would love to, obviously. I would love to see vintage both guys, right? But I do like how Condit's looking, in the training leading up to this. Social media is looking in good shape, looking like he's really getting those rounds, making the tours from BMF to Jackson Wink. And listening to the interview, he had the edge that I haven't heard since the WEC days when he was kicking down the doors of the Hard Rock and still coming out to rage against the machine. You know what I'm talking about, Dan. I felt like I saw that Carlos Condit. They just had this, Matt Brown saying the spiel and how he's going to dominate him and go everywhere. And Carlos Condit just felt like old Carlos Condit again, just like the Carlos Condit you wanted to see against Nick Diaz, right? Even in the promos, which you can blame that on editing. But yeah, he looked mean again, man. I'm going to fuck him up. Pardon my French to the channel. But yeah, it was, I liked it. And I know I don't usually, I'm the analyst guy, I'm the technical guy. I don't make picks off of silly stuff like, media interviews, but I'd be lying if I said that didn't help sway what I needed to see. Because really, we don't know how these guys are going to come in. There's another matchup we're going to talk to that's like this as well, Dan. But I'm going to go with Carlos Condit here.
I mean, it always pumps me up when the fighter says, "I'm going to finish," and then they say their name. I'm going to finish Matt Brown. Like, oh shit, you know what I mean? Like, those are like big words. Like, any fighter can say that about their opponent, and it's going to pump me up no matter who it is. If you say you are going to finish, insert name, I'm getting pumped up for that fight. As far as the McGee fight, I mean, I did pick Condit just because, in my opinion, it's like one of those situations where, if you look at their primes, Condit was an interim champ. In McGee's prime, he was top 30 to top 50. So just because they're a little bit older now, I don't really think that they've, are on the same level because of that. I still think Condit's going to always be better than McGee. The thing with this fight, even though, in their primes, Condit was interim champ, Matt Brown, I think he may have reached like number 5. I know for sure he cracked the top 10. I don't remember the actual final number he got to. I think it might have been number 5, but either way, a former interim champ with a former top 10 guy. So these guys weren't too far off in the rankings. And interestingly enough, 7 years ago when they were supposed to fight, I had Matt Brown then, right? So I was picking Matt Brown, but this is a different Carlos Condit and it's a different Matt Brown, right? And speaking of the McGee fight, like, I wasn't too surprised. And like you said, don't overvalue it. I'm not overvaluing it. I like, to me, it was like, that's what he was supposed to do. So I'm not thinking this is a new Condit or anything like that. With Brown, however, I know he just turned 40, but like, he was actually in there with some fresh meat his last fight. Like, Condit was in, and real quick, before I talk about this Miguel Baeza fight, how like ironic is it that Carlos Condit gets to fight the two guys that died from heroin overdoses and were revived back to back? Court McGee and Matt Brown. Like, interesting, right? And another,
oh my gosh,
some more history for you. I mean, that's true, right? Like, they died and came back to life.
No, yeah, absolutely. Immortal.
They're inspirations, the immortal.
So I got the
Court
immortal
McGee,
tattoo,
right?
So I got the immortal tattoo
for sure. And I mean, some more history for you. Matt Brown was the first man to defeat Douglas Lima. He actually did it like down the street from me in Kennesaw, Georgia, at like some dude's basement, and just, it was bloody and vicious. Also the first man to beat Wonder Boy. Also in Atlanta, by the way, Dan Top. So Matt Brown's got a history in ATL.
Dude, don't mess with him in ATL.
Unless you're Jake Ellenberger. But we won't talk about that because that never happened, right?
Right.
And the thing with that fight was like, so Jake, the way that happened, I still can't believe that happened. Like, the way the fight started out, like 2 seconds into it, Jake drops him with an overhand right. So we know Jake hits hard, but after Matt got up, Jake was kind of surprised he got up. Jake starts backing up. Jake starts covering up. Jake's ready to go home. And Matt starts fighting him with his hands down. Matt eats one body kick. Matt historically to the body, how that goes, right? So we saw what happened there. But yeah, Matt's had a history in Atlanta. He actually fought Dong Young Kim here as well, back at UFC 88, I believe, back when
that's right.
Chuck Liddell fought Rashad Evans. So he's got a history here in Atlanta. But anyways, I was at the Wonder Boy and the Jake Ellenberger fights. But let's I'm getting off track here. So both these guys are such legends, man. I'm gonna go with Matt Brown. I don't really know why, like I just think that, look, I had him 7 years ago. I'm going to stick with my pick. I'm going to pick him here as the underdog. Look, the reason why, I do know why, is because I think it's a 50-50 fight. So I'm going to go with the underdog here. But usually when I have a 50-50 fight and I got like a plus 145 to plus 150, it's usually like automatic, like, go bet this, because this isn't even about who you think is going to win. It's about percentages. And I agree with that. But I got so much like fan investment in this fight, like, that I don't want to like be emotionally tied to having money in this spot. I just kind of want to sit back and watch it, like, just as a fan, enjoy two legends, two guys that I think should be Hall of Famers. Two guys that when I first started watching the sport were like, in their prime. I mean, I know you remember the beatdown Matt Brown put on Pete Sell when he finished him 3 times. You remember, I think Yves Levine was reffing that fight.
Holy crap. Yeah,
with
that's
Condit,
a great call. Great call.
The first Condit fight I ever saw was his WEC fight with Miura, was his name?
Oh,
Miura?
great fight. One of my favorite, Hiro Mitsumura. Yeah.
Right. So yeah. Okay. So like that's how I got introduced to these two. So they immediately became like my favorite fighters. Now they're fighting. So I'll just go with the underdog. I'll go with Matt Brown. May the best man win.
For what it's worth, Dan, I asked myself the same question who I would have picked 7 years ago. And for what it's worth, I too would have picked Matt Brown for his pressure and his elbows. I guess if I had to give a reason why, aside from the silly media thing, I will say a factor that we haven't brought up that will play a lot in these matchups is that it's the bigger cage. And I think that'll help Condit more than Brown. We'll have to see. Even like trying to play something fun like the over is juiced, which again, a lot of unknown commodities coming off of layoffs, etc. So a lot of people are looking for safe angles. Everyone has the same idea. All of the overs are juiced ahead of time. So just letting you all know right now.
I'll tell you what the safe angle is on this fight, Dan. Tom, you ready?
Go ahead.
Pass.
Yeah, that's the best angle. That is.
So, but real quick, because I was going to talk
angle.
about this Miguel Baeza fight. So Matt Brown, he fought some fresh meat his last fight. He fought one of the top prospects at 170, and Miguel Baeza, he hurt Miguel Baeza bad, man. He knocked his mouthpiece out. He started doing the Matt Brown blitz, but you know, with these kids that are in their 20s, they've never been knocked out before. They can recover. And Condit's never been knocked out, but you know, someone of where Condit's at in his career, he gets caught with those shots. It might be his first knockout loss, but on the flip side, Condit comes out here, he goes to the liver of Matt Brown. I don't expect Matt Brown to be more durable now than he was 10 years ago either. So I could see a finish on either side, but like I said, I view it 50-50, so I'll take the dog. May the best man win. So Dan, Tom, the featured bout also in the welterweight division, we got the return of Santiago Genchiboa Ponzinibbio, and he actually changed his nickname. It's no longer Genchiboa, which means good man. Now it's the Argentine Dagger. Now, real quick, and I know I haven't even mentioned his name, but someone correct me. Is it Argentine or is it Argentinian? Like I'm still to this day, I don't know if it's Argentine or Argentinian.
I don't know where Argentinian falls into play, but I've heard John Anik use Argentine more than one occasion, so I'm going to go with Anik. I figure he's properly schooled on that more than me. That's for dang sure. So I'm going to go with Argentine. But if you ask me to break it down on when you used which one, I wouldn't know, Dan.
I mean, John Anik's verbal fluency is on another level. So if that's what he's going with, that's what I'm going with too, Dan, Tom. But you got the Argentine Dagger taking on the Leech, Jingliang, and it's a bummer what Santiago's been through, man. For those that don't know, so Santiago Ponzinibbio, he had the devastating, vicious, brutal performance against Neil Magny, where, you know, when you go to the later rounds with a guy like Neil Magny, usually you're getting out volume. But I mean, had that fight been a 3-round decision, it would have been a 30-26, a 30-25. Instead, he added insult to injury by, you know, destroying him for 3 straight rounds and then face planting him in the 4th. So Santiago was coming off the kind of win where he was matched up with Usman his very next fight, and the winner of that was going to go on to fight Tyron Woodley. So a lot of people thought, myself included, that Santiago Ponzinibbio could have been the guy to dethrone Tyron Woodley. But man, he had this bacterial infection that completely derailed everything, like to a point where he lost all his muscle mass. The doctors told him he might never fight again. Santiago Ponzinibbio is a big welterweight. He thought about dropping to 55s. Is that not like a massive red flag right there? But man, and then he also got COVID too. Like he made a full recovery, put his muscle back on, and then he gets COVID. Like he just cannot catch a break. But finally, he's back. And it's not an easy fight either with Jingliang. You know, in one sense, like, you can say, oh, it's a tune-up fight, just in the sense that it's a non-top 15 guy. And Santiago, you know, he beat Neil Magny. He was supposed to fight Usman. He's in there with the top 5 guys. But man, Jingliang hits really hard. Like, all I'm saying is Pons has to be Pons to come out here and make this look easy like he would have done 2 years ago. If it's not the same Pons, I'm very fearful for how he's going to look. And as a fan, I'm so hopeful that he looks like the normal Pons, because he's got a lot of advantages here, man. I mean, look, Jingliang, he's a power hitter, but he's been knocked down 5 times in his UFC career. He's never been knocked out, but he's been knocked down 5 times. Pons has landed 9 knockdowns in his UFC career. So I can totally see Pons coming out here and dropping Jingliang the same way that guys that aren't known for their one-hitter quitter have been doing to Lee. Like guys like David Zawada dropped him in the first round. Jake Matthews isn't known for that one-punch knockout power. He dropped him twice. So not to say if those guys can drop you, Pons can drop you, but if those guys can drop you, Pons can drop you. The thing is, are we getting Pons? Is this going to be Pons, or is this going to be a deflated, diminished guy that we don't recognize? Like that. That's kind of like you know how. Sorry, I know you're about to say something, but you know how in that Tom Breeze fight versus that kid KB Bueller, I was like, this fight isn't even about KB Bueller. This fight's all about Tom Breeze. This fight isn't even about Li Jingliang. This fight's all about Santiago Ponzinibbio. So, where do you think he's at?
That's tough to know, man. I mean, I haven't been following him too closely from his social media to what the birdie's tweeting about, that he's back to normal, he's recovered, then got the COVID, of course, and it's hard to say anyone's recovered from that, and that's where it even gets even trickier than it already is. Obviously, Dan already detailed what the man was dealing with before that, because you don't know if he's dealing with long haul symptoms. A lot of these fighters aren't saying anything. Some fighters aren't taking bookings because of it. Some are, and then it gets canceled, and then they come out and say, oh, thank goodness it got canceled, because no joke, I was still dealing with symptoms. We've seen that, so we really don't know where a lot of these fighters are just with the post-COVID stuff alone, not to mention the layoff, not to mention the bacteria or muscular diseases. I've seen guys come back from similar things before, but man, do they ravage your body. Some guys almost look unrecognizable. It is a flag, but at the same time, I do remember Santiago Ponzinibbio being a guy who really enjoyed his food and his glasses of wine during training camp, even, and didn't hide that. And I think he's a healthy 170. I think that's where he should stay. But he definitely had some, extra. Maybe if he, his body went through a massive change, yeah, maybe I could see that. But again, who knows? We don't know until we see the guy out there performing. I like that it's a bigger cage. I like that it's a 3-round fight. And I do like the styles matchup, because Lee can make things ugly. Apparently, since getting choked unconscious, which is surprisingly the only time he's been stopped in his career by Nakamura. Apparently, since then, he's gotten a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. We all know Ponzinibbio. I don't know if it's a Japanese Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but he's always had one that he's been credited to since even like back in his tough days. Either way, what I do like since back in his tough days is that Ponzinibbio is a very urgent scrambler. He really put that urgency up and has kind of fortified that through the years spent at an American top team. So I'm not too worried about that, coupled with the big cage. It all comes down to how Ponzinibbio looks. And for me, it's not even so much Lee's, heavy right hand. It's more the calf kicks and leg kicks. Like, what if, if he lands one of those on Ponzinibbio and it hits him just right and messes him up, and, that tints the fight. Like, outside of something like that happening, or Ponzinibbio just looking like a shadow of himself, I'm going to pick him to win this fight. I don't know if I'm as confident as the current odds say, though, Dan.
I mean, speaking of leg kicks, Pons has some of the most devastating calf kicks in the entire division. One of the best right hands in the entire division. And you brought up the Ultimate Fighter, which I'm glad you did, because a lot of people, how we were talking about Max Holloway being an uncrowned champion. A lot of people consider Santiago Ponzinibbio to be the uncrowned tough champion, because he never actually lost on tough. In fact, he even beat the winner, Leo Santos, but what ended up happening was he got an injury. So he beats Leo Santos in the semifinals, and it's supposed to be Pons versus William Macario in the finals. Pons gets an injury, so they're like, hey, how about the guy you just beat, Leo Santos? How about he steps up? So then Leo steps up for Pons. He ends up beating William Macario. He becomes the Ultimate Fighter. So a lot of people that watched that season thought that Pons was the uncrowned tough champion, and that would just be another accolade on his resume. But look, this is one of those fights where it comes down to the weigh-ins for me. I got to see how he looks. If he looks like Pons, I got Pons here, man. Listen, I like Lee. He's tough. He's exciting. But there's levels to this shit. I don't consider Lee to be a top 15 guy. And every single time I bet on Lee, he loses, especially outside of China. And then when I bet against him, he wins, right? In the Zaleski fight, but that was in China. Now, let me talk about this whole China thing. So, it's easy to say, oh, when he fights in China, he wins. And when he fights outside of China, he loses. But that's such a blanket statement. But what I want to get at is this. The reason why he looks so good in China and so bad outside of China is because the flight takes so much out of him, Dan Tom. And I looked it up. Beijing to Abu Dhabi, because I was under the impression this was going to be like some short flight, 9.5 hours. And then I was told, well, actually, Jingliang did this camp at Alpha Male. So I was like, oh, so it's a 24-hour flight. Jingliang doesn't do good on those long ass flights, my man. So you saw the Jake Matthews fight in Australia. You saw the Neil Magny fight in the USA. And then the Zaleski fight in China. I'm very curious what would have happened if that fight was in Brazil. But I also think that Zaleski's a fantastic kicker. Zaleski's got a great ground game, but Pons has way better hands than Zaleski. And
oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think Pons also has better hands than Lee. But Lee is a power hitter. Santiago does get cracked early in a lot of fights. He's got to be careful. But aside from that, I see him, he's got great movement in the early going when he starts finding his range. And eventually when he finds the distance for that right hand, he puts people down. I think he's going to be the first man in UFC history to actually finish Jingliang when he knocks him down. So if Pons still looks like Pons, I got Pons, Dan Tom.
Yeah. I see people are jumping on the over, but don't forget Pons could, find his momentum, and he's a swarmer. He's got really good killer instinct. So guys who swarm, throw volume, and have really good killer instinct plus knockout power. I'm an over guy. I love going contrarian, y'all. I'm not hating. I'm just saying, be careful. That was, again, noting a lot of the over trends that I'm seeing on the betting lines. But I'm totally with all that analysis. And yeah, again, it's got to come down to how he looks.
Now, Dan Tom, next up, we got the viral sensation, Joaquin Buckley taking on Italy's unranked middleweight, Alessio Di Chirico. And I had to say unranked because they just got a top 5 guy in Marvin Vettori. And initially, Alessio was the guy waving the flag for the middleweight division in Italy. But now it's Marvin Vettori. So Alessio has got to get back on track. He's got his hands full here with Joaquin Buckley. I mean, the middleweight division is ran by Mick Maynard. He's the matchmaker for the middleweight division. And I'm under the inclination that he's not trying to set up his prospect, Joaquin Buckley, to take a loss here. I think if you had to ask Mick Maynard, off the record, who are you more invested in, Joaquin Buckley or Alessio Di Chirico? I don't think he's going to skip a beat before he tells you Joaquin Buckley, right? And as far as how they match up, we know Joaquin throws massive bombs, but like for a short guy that throws big bombs, like he's got really good output and his gas tank is on point too. I don't see him slowing down too much. Here's where he's got to look out, Dan Tom. Like I said, he's a shorter guy. It's funny. He's got the Jake Ellenberger height. And what I mean by that is that every single time we see him fight, he's listed at a different height. So I saw Jake Ellenberger listed at 5'8" one fight, and then I saw him listed at 6 feet the next fight, right? So I've seen him everywhere in between. I'm guessing Joaquin's between 5'8" and 5'10", okay? But no matter what, he ain't taller than 5'10". He's a short middleweight. But he's got that Mike Tyson thing going on where he might be the shorter guy, but he closes that distance. He starts getting off on those bombs. And then when he starts getting flashy too, I mean, look out. He'll get a knockout of the year on you before you even expect it, man. Like, I didn't see that coming at all. But in this fight, like I was getting to, what he needs to look out for is this. Alessio, he's got some sharp counters, man. He's got some decent boxing for MMA. So when Joaquin closes that distance, because he has to close that distance, he's the shorter man here. Although he might have a reach advantage. I need to look that up because he does have some long arms. Definitely the shorter guy. He's going to have to close the distance. When he does that, Alessio has some very, very sharp counters that we saw in his last fight against Cummings, which really came down to the wire. I mean, had he not been knocked down with that shin to chin, it might have been a split decision that went either way. However, he was knocked down with that shin to chin, and he's coming back pretty soon after. So has his chin been compromised at all? Because you're going up against a very, very heavy hitter here in Joaquin. So I'm going to go with Joaquin Buckley. I think Mick Maynard knows exactly what he's doing. I'll put my faith in him that he's developing his prospect properly. I'll go with Joaquin Buckley for the win.
Yeah, it's hard to not, you don't want to overcorrect the steering wheel, which I think if anybody would have been guilty of that, maybe you would have been last time, which I don't blame you, by the way, you look at the opponent. I'm just talking about coming off of a hype, off of a highlight reel knockout, right? Which is generally the Gen Pops kind of reaction. But when you really break things down, I agree with you, Dan, how you laid it out. I also do think Mick Maynard knows what he's doing with this one. And Buckley should roll. I will add that I do like that you give Chirico here some credit. That it doesn't sound like I'm overlooking him as I blow through this matchup here, but he does have sharp counters. However, I don't like that he's going to be forced into that same game, which is already a low output game. And when I say he's forced into that same game and more of a low output game, I mean that what was Zach Cummings? He was a southpaw, and he's going to get another southpaw here. In fact, Chirico 0-2 against UFC southpaws. He had it in his last UFC fight. He had it in his first UFC fight against Bojan Velichkovic. And when you have that open stance matchup, a lot of guys, even if they're not counter fighters, will be more apt to counter because they don't feel, even though the jab is still there, folks, they don't, at least orthodox fighters particularly, they don't feel as comfortable with the jab. Chirico fight from both stances, of course, but against just another southpaw is what I was kind of looking at. And yeah, the dude's 0-2 there. Buckley, of course, can be wild. He can throw from both stances as well, but we know where he's well equipped. Plus, he's got that stature, which can be really difficult to deal with. Outside of Alewale Barboza, who was literally jumping into the knee that got Chirico his one finish. Like outside of that, he really hasn't had to deal too much with that stature either. So it'll be interesting to see what Chirico does, but I'm not optimistic. So I will go with Buckley to roll. And I think it'll be a decision. But again, you're looking at if you're one of these people that are piling on the overs, which seems to be the theme when I'm looking at this line movement here. It's starting to get in the realm of what, I think Buckley's priced at some houses. So again, be careful. If you can always take a money line, take a money line. I know my co-host will tell you that. He's a smart man when it comes to that. Doesn't get greedy.
You can't. You'll lose everything if you do. But yeah, we're both on Joaquin Buckley to defeat Alessio Di Chirico. I mean, as long as his head hasn't exploded, after those 2 vicious knockouts and all those bonuses, he's a celebrity now, right? So as long as he still got his head on straight, I definitely got him here. So let's see this performance. Now, last but not least, Dan and Tom, we saved the best for last. I cannot wait for this middleweight matchup between 2 undefeated prospects because we got Hawaii's Punahele Soriano taking on Serbia's Dusko Todorovic. And let me just say off the top, I'm a massive fan of both these guys. I bet on both of them in their UFC debuts. And I like the kind of comparisons I'm about to make here. Like you're going to see how high on both these guys I truly am. I mean, even before I cashed on Puna to beat Oscar Pihota, I already was comparing him to someone. You know how I called Brad Tavares Hawaiian Bisping? Well, I call Puna Hawaiian Vitor. He's got that southpaw stance with that nasty left hand. And if Punahele smells blood, I mean, you might as well climb out of the octagon because the guy is going to bomb off on you until he puts you out. And also, he's a D3 All-American. He's got some nice wrestling in his back pocket that no one talks about. I got nothing but good things to say about Puna in that regard. I think he's going to have a very long career in the UFC. Very exciting guy. The things I'm worried about is his gas tank. And when I talk about gas tank and cardio and stuff, because I feel like people really generalize it and they make it seem like these guys aren't out here running their miles or doing their sprints, which like I know Puna's running his miles and doing his sprints and his strength and conditioning. Like he's got the right people around him. It's more like it's a pacing thing. He goes so damn hard for that finish that it's just like science that he's going to get tired because when you go 100%, I mean, it's kind of like if you're riding a car and you push that pedal to the metal all the way down, you're going 100, like you're going to burn fuel. Like that's just how it works. Like, it's not like you're going to get more gas by going faster. You're going to get less gas by going faster in the car. So Puna style, similar to Vitor Belfort style, he's going to run into spots where he kind of does slow down after the first round if he doesn't get you out of there. And that's kind of what we saw in Contender Series. But he's so much better than Jamie Pickett that Pickett can't capitalize on a slowing down opponent that's UFC caliber. He just can't. But someone who can is this kid Dusko Todorovic. Now, just how I compared Puna to Hawaiian Vitor, I think this kid, Dusko, is Serbian Fedor, man. I think that he's got this vibe about him. Like, let's just put it this way. If you put a big bet on Dusko Todorovic and you start feeling nervous about it, just pull up any of his interviews and hear this guy talk. His IQ, his intelligence. Like, this guy is like brilliant. And then you hear that he's like also doing like a thesis, and like he's like a genius. Like, he is like way smart. And anytime you hear him talk, like I said, if you're nervous because you put a big bet on him and you pull up one of his interviews, you'll be pretty damn comforted when you hear him talk, because like the kind of intelligence this kid has. And then you find out that his gym in Serbia, it's literally just dedicated to him becoming champ. Like, the whole camp is all revolves around Dusko. It doesn't, it's not some super camp where there's 30 guys on the mat and everybody, is just looking out for themselves. Every single person in Dushko's camp, it's all about Dusko. He is the star of the camp, and they're all dedicated to making this kid a future world champion. And when you talk about having the proper experience outside the UFC before you get into the UFC, I mean, this is a guy who knocked out Michel Pereira when he was like 22 years old. Okay, so this kid Dusko is 22 years old. He's going out there knocking out Michel Pereira. And I'm not talking about knocked him out like he closed his eyes, threw a lucky kick. I'm talking about he walked him down, had no fear in the world of Michel, who's like this devastating striker that like dudes like are scared of. Like, when dudes beat Michel in the UFC, it's usually because he did some dumb shit. They ended up getting on top. They stall him out. Oh, thank God we don't got to strike with this guy. Whereas Dusko just walked him down like, oh, you think you got better striking than me? I disagree, and just knocked him out like no problem. That's when I took note. And then he had his Contender Series fight, and similar to Puna, it wasn't his best performance. But I can make an excuse for Dusko, and I can't make that same excuse for Puna. And let me tell you what that excuse is. Dusko Todorovic had to travel from Serbia to Las Vegas for that fight. This first time coming to the States, the jet lag, the whole bit. Puna had to walk down the street from his apartment to the Apex. So there's no excuse in my eyes for the way that Puna gassed in that fight. It's just like I said. And again, I'm not disrespecting Puna. I actually like him a lot as a fighter. I like him as a person. He seems like just like a really nice, genuine person. So I like him a lot. And like I said, I bet him against Pihota. I love the guy. But when I'm breaking down this fight, if it sounds brutal, it's just because I'm being honest. I really think that this time next year, we're going to be looking at this kid Dusko as a top 15 guy. And we're going to be looking at Puna as just an exciting UFC guy that gets knockouts and is fun to watch. So the thing with Dusko here is he's got to look out for this left hand of Puna. Puna, when he cracks those and they hit the deck, Dusko fights with his hands down. So eventually someone's going to make him pay for that. I just don't think this is the time, man. The kid's only 26. I think it's going to be down the line when he gets older. But as far as the skills, when Dusko is up close, man, I haven't seen dirty boxing that nice in the UFC since maybe Randy Couture. He's got some of the best dirty boxing that I think I've ever seen in the middleweight division. And he's so well-rounded. I mean, if shit's not going his way on the feet, he can mix it up and take you to the mat. But the thing I like most above all, because the technique is great, but the kid's got the heart too, Dan Tom. And the reason I know that is because every single takedown he attempted on Contender Series got stuffed, and it didn't prevent him from going forward. He got his mouthpiece knocked out, never took a step back. I mean, this kid not only has the intelligence, not only has the skills, but also has the heart and the determination of a warrior. Because usually there's this saying about fighters that the best fighters are usually not the smartest guys, because the smartest guys, they're thinkers. They think a lot, and they often think about, hey, like, what if I get knocked out? What if this? What if that? They kind of psych themselves out. Whereas like this kid Dusko is like a genius, but he's also has his head on straight in terms of like the nerves and the confidence. Like, he's so confident, but doesn't border on arrogance. I think he might be a unique character. I could be off, but I think we're looking at a special individual here. So I got to go with Dusko here just because I think he projects further. But I think Puna will be back for sure. He's got nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I think he's definitely unique, Todorovic. I think that especially he'll be really unique if his durability holds up. That's going to be the real big key. Obviously, that's going to be the main criticism for a guy with his low hands. It does worry me, but I'm also a guy who kind of likes guys who know what to do with that style. So I don't want to sound hypocritical. However, he doesn't get it from a karate style. He doesn't have a karate background. He has a taekwondo style, which is not that style. He shows more of a boxing, which is where I'm guessing whoever's schooling him in boxing is giving him that style, and I love it because it's great. Offensively, defensively, I know it looks really risky, especially if guys throw quick head kicks, which Puna can do. We saw that in his Contender Series fight, at least early in the fight, right? It's definitely going to be dangerous. However, it's just weird. I'm weird about the Smart thing because he's definitely smart. And I think, even John Anik tweeted out earlier, he was super impressed with him. And I think he's definitely intelligent, and his composure, his confidence, and it's not arrogance. It's special, right? It's definitely special. I get what you're saying, and I completely agree. But it's weird when I say smartness because it's like, okay, it's Taekwondo black belt and a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but he fights complete opposite of those styles. He boxes and fights in the clinch and will occasionally, not often, go for takedowns. So that's really weird to me. That being said, it's not bad. It's great. You mentioned Randy Couture, right? That's great. Yeah, boxing, clinching. And as we saw that developed, I actually really don't like that he crowds his work. It's something that he's kind of done occasionally on the regionals. We saw him do it a lot. And again, I'm not going to write him off because not so much of the travel, but I just think, and I'm sure you can agree with this, Dan, that it can be dangerous to judge guys positively or negatively too hard with those Contender Series sample sizes because we don't know we're trying to figure out what level, fighter A is at by looking at another fighter who we really don't know who they were fighting on the Contender Series, even if we kind of researched them and followed them, right? They're not a proven product yet. So I want to be careful about being too positive or too negative on these guys' Contender Series fights. But what we did do with Todorovic is we saw an evolution just from the Contender Series fight to the Dequan Townsend fight. And again, I know Dequan Townsend, I know that's not a big name or an impressive name or whatever, but if you look at what Todorovic was doing, he had just the most beautiful just wrist control. He always had the head position and underhooks. That's what's allowing him to keep these guys that have no wrestling. So that's going to be curious. Now he's actually going against a wrestler for the first time, minus Michel Pereira, who had some like Brazilian regional like wrestling stuff like on his resume. But he added underhook, the head position, and wrist control, and was just doing beautiful work, like you said, Dan. I think that could be something worth looking for. However, against one of the more stronger and bigger middleweights, and the guy not just was a D3, an All-American wrestler, but he's also a brown belt in judo. I mean, you look at that really slick foot sweep. Yeah. I mean, and you actually see it. It's not just like some bullshit when he was a kid or whatever. Like he's actually he almost looks like a freestyle wrestler, not a folk style wrestler with that foot sweep. And I know, again, it's Jamie Pickett. It's not, again, these guys aren't doing it to the best of guys, but just look at what they're doing. And he hits that really slick foot sweep. And then as soon as Jamie Pickett gets up, that's where I tease that head kick that he won. Like those are things you really love to see. So I don't know, at least early, if Todorovic, that'll be a good idea because Puna A is strong and maybe we'll have some things that he's not used to feeling. I do like smaller camps. That's why Tyson Chartier gets, and the New England Cartel gets credit for me. I love that boxing approach more than the bigger camp approach. I think that's a fair note. However, perhaps it's my bias here, which I didn't even state, by the way, Eric Nixick was going to be in his corner. There's always a bias whether I pick those guys or I don't. Again, I don't always pick those guys just blindly, folks. But I do want to state that because I am going to go with Soriano here, but in no way is it a super confident pick. And in fact, I don't disagree with Todorovic being favored. I think Todorovic is the deserved favorite. I think the kid's ceiling is high, Dan. You're not crazy for thinking he's special. I'm almost bummed these guys got to go against each other because I, too, like you, Dan, I like both guys, too. However, Hawaiian bias, extreme couture bias, Eric Nixick bias, whatever you want to call it or accuse me of, there's something that I've been saying since I picked and cashed Rick Story as a plus 275 or something dog over Thiago Alves back in the day. Durable southpaws who can wrestle are always worth a look at plus money. That being said, even though I'm picking Soriano and even though I do stand by that long-time piece of anecdotal analysis, Dan, I gotta warn people at least that are following me off my side of the cliff, because I think this matchup, regardless if you're on the Todorovic side or the Soriano side, if you look at it, a lot of it's chalk, a lot of it's I don't know, a lot of it's overpriced on the I don't know, right? Therefore, if you look at a Todorovic line at minus 150, that's a point of entry. That's playable chalk. Or if you're looking for underdogs, Soriano, whether you're picking him or not, he's definitely a lively underdog on this card. I think that's very fair to say. With his power and his abilities, we don't know where he's at from this layoff. That's another thing. So I'm going to see this fight getting a lot of attention. I think this is going to be like the better's fight of the night or whatever you will. Dan, I think there's going to be a lot of action on both sides. So I will warn anybody that's on my side of things or following me off a cliff here, because I'm not telling you, oh, I'm so confident or whatever. I am going to pick the underdog here. However, Todorovic, this is going to be his second time at Fight Island, by the way. He's already made this trip. And the big cage, by the way, the big cage is definitely going to favor Todorovic. Those things are going to be factors favoring the favorite here. So don't get it twisted, folks. But yes, my pick is Soriano.
I mean, the thing I love about a fight like this, like with two undefeated guys, someone's always got to go, is that we get to find out who the better man is. Like, we're not out here protecting either of these guys. That's the beautiful thing. That's the reason I love the UFC so much, is that we get to see the best fight the best. And I know these are two unranked guys, but I'm just saying, like, these are two top prospects. Like, you could give both these guys some more Oscar Pijotas and Daquan Townsends and build them up and let them fight each other when they're both ranked. But they're like, fuck it, man. Let's find out who the better guy is Saturday night. I love that kind of stuff, Dan Tom, because I do want to know who the better guy is.
Yeah, man, it's definitely a fight of the night for many reasons, not just for bettors, for hardcores, and we're going to find out. We'll see. Puna says he likes when fights go long. He tired out. He said he liked it when his wrestling career, however, MMA career, Puna gets a little crazy, right? So he's more of a wild card, in my opinion, to see where he's at. But either way, I think we're going to get a really good fight and two guys to get excited about in the future.
Well, Dan Tom, I think that about wraps it up. What a way to start off 2021. I mean, broke down the main card of UFC on ABC 1, or UFC Fight Island 7, as the cool kids like to say. And it's been an absolute pleasure, my friend. I hope you had a very happy new year. All the fans, make sure you'll follow my co-host, Dan Tom, at Dan Tom MMA. You can follow me at Best Fight Picks. Make sure y'all follow Line Movement at line_movement, or go to linemovement.com. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Also, check us out on Apple Podcast. Type in Line Movement MMA Betting Show, and also all the other cool Line Movement stuff is up there too. Y'all can make sure to follow that. Hook up that 5-star review. We truly appreciate it. Also, I want to take a second to give a shout out to our producer, Jordan. Thank you very much, Jordan. Also, thank you to everybody behind the scenes, Nick, Brian, Joe, Dan, James, everybody else. Thank you guys very, very much. We truly appreciate it. And to the fans, thank you so much to the fans. We love you guys. We're still here because of you guys. So thank you very, very much. We'll be back next week with 2 shows for both the cards coming up. We got, obviously, the big one, McGregor versus Poirier. But on Wednesday, before that, you also got Magny and Chiesa. So we'll be breaking down both those fights and cannot wait for that. So again, follow us, line_movement. Hit that like, hit that subscribe. Truly appreciate it. Everybody stay safe. Enjoy the fights, and we will speak soon. What's up, Line Movement family? If you liked what you saw, make sure you click any of the videos on the screen and subscribe to Line Movement today.